I don't need you to love me, he said quietly. I just need you to look like you do. The cafe smelled like burnt coffee and rain, the kind of place people forgot 5 minutes after leaving. But Ethan Caldwell didn't belong in places like this. Not with a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the entire room and a silence around him that made even the clinking cups sound softer, like the world was adjusting itself to his presence. And Lily Carter noticed it the moment he walked in, not because she knew who he was, but because men like him didn't look at anything. Twice, except today, he looked at her, steady, unreadable, as if he had already made a decision before she even spoke, and that made her uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, her voice calm but careful. What can I get you? He didn't answer right away, just studied her like he was searching for something under the surface, something she hoped he wouldn't find. Then finally, 5 minutes of your time, he said, placing a black card on the table instead of a menu. No logo she recognized, just a name, simple and heavy, Ethan Caldwell, and something in the air shifted, like the room suddenly held its breath. Lily didn't sit. She didn't smile either. I'm working, she replied softly, but he didn't move, didn't push, just added, I'll pay for your shift. And that should have been enough to make her walk away or say yes. But instead she hesitated, because it wasn't the money, it was the way he said it, like he was used to solving everything with numbers, and for a second, she wondered what kind of problem he thought she was. Then she sat, slowly, across from him, keeping her distance. 5 minutes, she said, and he nodded once, like a deal had already been sealed. I need a fiancé, he said, direct, no hesitation, and Lily blinked, not because it shocked her, but because of how simple he made it sound, like asking for another cup of coffee. A fake one, he added. Public appearances, family events, a few weeks at most. I'll handle everything else. His voice never rose, never softened. It stayed in that controlled space that felt almost too quiet, and Lily felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear exactly, but a quiet warning, like stepping too close to deep water. Why me? She asked, and this time, he paused, just long enough to make the answer feel heavier than it should. Because you don't look like someone who would try to take more than what's offered, he said, and that should have offended her. Maybe it did, just a little, but she didn't show it. She just leaned back slightly, studying him now the way he had studied her, noticing the tiredness behind his eyes, the kind people tried to hide behind success. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the rain tapping softly against the window like a quiet countdown. Then he placed a number on the table, more than she had seen in months, maybe years, and pushed it toward her. All you have to do is pretend, he said. And that was when Lily looked at him, really looked, not at the suit or the money or the offer, but at the space around him, the emptiness. That didn't match the life he was offering, and something in her shifted, slow and certain. I'll stay, she said, her voice soft but steady, and Ethan's fingers stilled for the first time, just slightly. But don't ask who I really am. The number on the table stayed between them like a quiet test, untouched, almost invisible compared to the weight of what had just been said, and Ethan did not reach for it again. He only watched her, more carefully now, as if trying to understand whether she was serious or simply playing a different kind of game, because no one had ever answered him like that before. Not with a condition that sounded less like negotiation and more like a boundary. You expect me to agree to that? He asked, his voice still calm, but carrying something sharper underneath. And Lily did not look away. She folded her hands lightly in her lap, steady, grounded. You said you only need me to pretend, she replied. So I will. But I am not giving you anything real to control. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they landed with a precision that made Ethan lean back slightly, studying her again, this time not as an option, but as a variable he had not planned. For the rain outside grew heavier, tapping faster against the glass, and for a moment the cafe felt smaller, quieter, like the world had narrowed down to just this table. You are in no position to set terms, he said, not harsh, just factual, the kind of statement he had built his life on. But Lily shook her head once, slow, certain. Then find someone else, she answered, and there was no challenge in her tone, no attempt to provoke him, just a simple truth, and that was what unsettled him. The most, because she meant it. She would walk away without hesitation, even with the money sitting right there, even with whatever he was offering. And something in that moment shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Ethan exhaled quietly, his fingers brushing the edge of the card as if grounding himself. "No questions about your past," he said finally, adjusting the terms in a way he had never done before. "But you follow my schedule, my rules in public, and you do not disappear without notice." Lily listened, her expression unchanged, but her eyes softened just slightly, like she recognized the trade he was making, not just in conditions, but in control. "I can agree to that," she said, then after a brief pause. "As long as you understand something too." And he waited, because now he had learned that her pauses meant something. "I might look like I belong in your world," she continued quietly, "but I do not live by it." The words lingered between them, not confrontational, just clear. And Ethan nodded once, slow, measured, as if accepting a contract that was no longer entirely his to define. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple envelope, sliding it toward her. "Address, time, everything you need is inside," he said, then stood, the movement smooth, controlled, but not as detached as before. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, something rare for him. "Be ready by tomorrow morning," he added, and Lily glanced at the envelope but did not open it yet. "I will finish my shift first," she said, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something in Ethan's expression, not quite surprise, not quite understanding, just a quiet acknowledgement that she was not stepping into his world immediately. She was choosing the moment, on her own terms, and as he turned to leave, the bell above the cafe door rang softly, blending with the sound of rain. Lily finally picked up the envelope, her fingers brushing against the edge like she was holding something heavier than paper, something that would change the direction of everything. And yet, she did not rush. She simply placed it beside the small ceramic cup she had been using all day, the one with a faint crack along the rim. And for a moment, she just looked at it, as if deciding whether she was ready to carry both things into whatever came next. "This is not your home," Ethan said quietly as the elevator doors opened, but Lily did not answer. She simply stepped out into a space that felt too still to belong to someone who lived in it. The penthouse stretched wide with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the early morning light reflecting off glass and steel, everything clean, polished, untouched, like a place designed to impress, but not to hold anyone. And for a moment, Lily just stood there, not overwhelmed, not excited, just observing, taking in the silence the way she used to listen to the rain back at the cafe, slow and careful, her small bag resting against her shoulder as if it carried more than clothes. Ethan watched her from a few steps behind, waiting for the reaction he was used to seeing, the hesitation, the quiet awe, the subtle shift in posture, but it did not come. Instead, she walked further inside at her own pace, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of a marble counter, as if confirming it was real. Then she turned slightly. "Where do I put my things?" she asked, her tone calm, practical, like she had just entered a regular apartment. And that question, simple as it was, grounded the moment in a way Ethan did not expect. He gestured toward the hallway. "The guest room is prepared," he said, and she nodded once before moving in that direction. No hesitation, no need for guidance, as if she had already decided she would not get lost here, not in space, not in anything else. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the open living area. And for the first time since this arrangement began, the silence felt different, not empty, but waiting. A few minutes later, she returned, now without the bag, but holding something else, a small ceramic cup, the same one from the cafe, the faint crack along the rim still visible, and she placed it gently on the kitchen counter like it belonged there, like it had always been there. Ethan noticed it immediately, his eyes resting on it longer than he intended. "You brought that?" he asked, not quite questioning, not quite understanding, and Lily followed his gaze, then nodded. "It helps me feel like I did not leave everything behind," she said softly, and there was no emotion pushed into the words, just a quiet truth. Ethan did not respond right away. He simply walked past her, opening a cabinet to reveal rows of untouched glassware, perfect, identical, expensive, and somehow less real than the one she had placed on the counter. You will need to adjust, he said. After a moment, his voice returning to that controlled tone. There are expectations, schedules, people who will be watching. Lily leaned lightly against the counter, her hand resting near the cup, not holding it, just close enough. I understand, she replied, then added. But I will not pretend when we are alone. And that made him pause, just slightly, his hand still on the cabinet door. That was part of the agreement. She continued, her eyes meeting his, steady, unafraid. I stay, but I do not perform for you. The words settled into the space between them, soft but firm, and Ethan closed the cabinet slowly, turning to face her fully now, as if recalibrating the rules again. You think this is about performance? He asked, and for the first time, there was something beneath the question, something closer to weariness than authority. Lily did not answer immediately. She picked up the cup instead, running her thumb gently along the cracked edge, then looked back at him. I think you have been surrounded by people who do not know how to stay unless they are playing a role, she said, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with something neither of them named. Outside, the city moved as it always did, fast, loud, and different, but inside, in that quiet space between a man who controlled everything and a woman who refused to be controlled, something had already begun to shift, small, almost invisible, but real enough that neither of them could ignore it anymore. You will need to learn how to stand next to me without shrinking, Ethan said as he adjusted his cufflinks, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of expectation, and Lily stood a few feet away in the quiet dressing room, the soft fabric of the dress unfamiliar against her skin, not uncomfortable, just different, like wearing a version of herself that did not fully belong yet. She looked at her reflection for a moment, then at him through the mirror. I am not shrinking, she replied gently. And he paused, just briefly, before nodding once as if accepting the correction without comment. The car ride downtown was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the distant sound of traffic, city lights stretching endlessly outside the window, and Lily watched them pass without asking questions, without trying to fill the space, something Ethan noticed more than he expected, because most people tried to speak when they were nervous around him, but she did not. She simply existed. Beside him, steady, present, and when the car finally stopped in front of the building, a tall glass tower glowing against the night sky, he stepped out first, then turned slightly, offering his hand without looking directly at her, a gesture practiced, automatic, and for a second, Lily hesitated, not because she did not understand what it meant, but because she could feel the shift it required, the line between pretending and becoming. Then she placed her hand in his, light but certain, and the moment their fingers touched, something quiet passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but awareness, like two separate worlds brushing for the first time. Inside, the event unfolded exactly as expected. Soft music, polished floors, voices blending into a controlled murmur. People turning as Ethan entered, their attention immediate, calculated, and then shifting again when they noticed. Her subtle glances, quiet assessments, the unspoken question of who she was and how she fit into his world. Lily felt it. All of it. But she did not react. She stayed close to him, not clinging, not distant, just aligned, like she had always known where to stand, and Ethan noticed that too. The way she did not overplay the role, did not exaggerate the connection. She simply existed beside him with a quiet confidence that made everything feel more believable than any performance could. Ethan. A voice called out, smooth and measured, and a woman approached, elegant, composed, her gaze sharp as it moved from him to Lily. You did not mention you were engaged, she said, her tone polite but edged with curiosity, and Ethan did not hesitate, his hand resting lightly at Lily's back, not possessive, just present. I do not mention everything, he replied, and Lily felt the subtle pressure of his hand, a signal, a reminder of the role, but when she spoke, her voice was her own, soft, steady. It is recent, she said, offering a small smile that did not try too hard, and the woman studied her for a moment longer before nodding, the tension easing just slightly as the conversation moved on, but the air remained charged, filled with eyes that lingered longer than necessary, questions that were not asked out loud, and through it all, Lily stayed calm, her movements natural, her presence quiet but grounded. And Ethan found himself watching her when he should have been focused elsewhere. Noticing the way she listened more than she spoke, the way she did not reach for attention, and yet somehow held it. And as the night stretched on, something shifted again, not in the room, but in him, a small crack in the control he had built so carefully, because for the first time, this arrangement did not feel entirely like something he was managing. It felt like something unfolding, something he could not fully predict. And when he finally looked down at her again, standing beside him, under the soft lights, her hand still resting lightly in his, he realized that she was not pretending the way he had expected. She was doing something else entirely, something quieter, something real. Enough that it made the line between the contract and everything beyond it begin to blur. "You did well tonight," Ethan said as the car door closed softly behind them, his voice low, almost lost in the quiet space between them. And Lily did not answer right away. She watched the city lights slide across the window again, slower this time, like everything had shifted just slightly out of its usual rhythm. "I did what you asked," she replied after a moment, her tone calm. But there was something beneath it, something that sounded less like obedience and more like distance, and Ethan noticed it, the way she separated herself from the moment even though she had stood beside him through all of it. "You did more than that," he said, his gaze lingering on her reflection in the glass. But she did not turn. She just rested her head lightly against the seat, her eyes half closed, as if the night had taken something out of her that she could not quite name. When they arrived back at the penthouse, the silence followed them inside. Soft, steady, familiar now, and Lily moved first. Slipping out of her shoes near the door, her steps quieter without them, more natural, like she was returning to herself piece by piece. Ethan loosened his tie, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, but not fully, never fully, and as he walked past the kitchen, he noticed the small ceramic cup still sitting exactly where she had left it, unchanged, unaffected by everything else around it. And before he could think too much about it, Lily stepped closer, reaching for it without hesitation. "Do you have any tea?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost casual, like this was something ordinary, something not part of any arrangement. Ethan paused, then nodded toward a cabinet. "There should be something there," he said, and she opened it, scanning the shelves filled with neatly arranged boxes, expensive brands, untouched, and she picked one without comment, moving with a quiet familiarity that did not match the space, but somehow did not feel out of place either. The sound of water running, the soft click of the kettle, the faint steam rising into the air, it all filled the room in a way that felt warmer than before, softer, and Ethan found himself standing there longer than necessary, watching without interrupting. "You do not have to do that," he said finally, but Lily shook her head slightly, her focus on the cup as she poured the water. "I am not doing it for you," she replied. Then after a small pause, "I am doing it because it helps." The honesty in her voice was quiet, unforced, and Ethan did not respond. He just leaned lightly against the counter, closer now than he had been before, the distance between them no longer defined by space but by something less visible. She handed him the cup a moment later, her fingers brushing his briefly, and the contact was small, almost nothing, but it lingered longer than it should have, not in touch, but in awareness. Ethan looked down at the cup, the faint crack along the rim catching the light. Imperfect, fragile, and yet still holding something warm, something real. He took a slow sip, the heat grounding, unexpected, and for the first time that day, his shoulders lowered just slightly, like he had stepped out of something heavy without realizing it. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, and Lily leaned back against the counter, her hands resting lightly at her sides. "That is because you expected something you could control," she answered, her voice soft but clear, and he looked at her then, really looked, the way he had in the cafe, but this time, there was less calculation in it, less distance, and something else beginning to take its place, something he did not fully understand yet. The city lights outside dimmed as the night deepened, the world moving on as it always did, but inside, in the quiet space of a kitchen that had never felt lived in until now, a simple cup of tea became something more than just a gesture. It became a moment neither of them had planned, and neither of them could easily walk away from. "Stay close to me tonight," Ethan said as the car slowed in front of the hotel entrance, his voice lower than usual, not commanding, but carrying something more deliberate, and Lily turned slightly toward him, her expression calm, her eyes searching his face for a brief second before she nodded once. "I always do," she replied softly, and the words settled between them in a way that felt different this time. Not just part of the role, but something closer to a quiet promise. The doors opened and the noise of the outside world rushed in, cameras flashing, voices calling his name, a wave of attention that felt sharper, more intense than before, and for the first time, Lily felt the pressure of it pressing in from all sides, not overwhelming, but real, undeniable. Ethan stepped out first as always, his posture composed, his presence instantly shifting the energy around him. Then he turned and reached for her hand, not just out of habit now, but with intention, and when their fingers met, there was no hesitation from either of them. They moved together through the entrance, the flashes catching every angle, every glance, every subtle movement. Inside, the ballroom was brighter, louder, filled with people who did not just observe but evaluated, their attention sharper, their curiosity less hidden. Whispers moved faster here, names carried weight, and tonight, Lily's presence beside him was no longer just a quiet curiosity. It was a statement. "Ethan," a familiar voice approached, older, firm, and when he turned, there was a slight shift in his expression, something more controlled, more guarded. "Father," he said, and the word carried history, expectation, something unresolved beneath the surface. The man's gaze moved immediately to Lily, measuring, assessing, not unkind, but not welcoming either. "So this is her," he said, his tone neutral, but the air around them tightened just slightly. Lily felt it, the unspoken challenge, the need to prove something she had never agreed to prove, but she did not step back. She did not tighten her grip on Ethan's hand. She simply stood there, steady, her voice soft when she spoke. "It is nice to meet you." And she meant it, not as performance, but as a choice, and that was what shifted something in the moment. Subtle, but enough that the older man paused before nodding once, the tension easing just enough to allow the conversation to move forward, but not enough to disappear completely. As the night continued, more people approached, more questions wrapped in polite words, more eyes watching how she moved, how she spoke, how she fit beside him. And through it all, Lily did not try to impress. She did not overplay the role. She listened, she answered simply, and when she smiled, it was real, quiet, unforced, and Ethan noticed the effect it had, the way the room responded differently, the way the skepticism softened, not because of who she pretended to be, but because of who she was. And then it happened, a voice from behind, sharper, more familiar than the rest. "Ethan, you move on quickly." And he turned, his expression tightening just slightly as a woman stepped closer, elegant, confident, her gaze flicking toward Lily with a hint of something colder, something personal. "I did not realize engagements happened this fast," she added, her tone light, but the meaning underneath clear. And for a brief second, the space between truth and performance blurred dangerously. Lily felt it, the shift, the weight of something she did not fully understand, and she glanced at Ethan, just once, a silent question. But he did not speak immediately, the pause stretching longer than it should. And in that moment, something inside Lily moved, not fear, not doubt, but instinct. She stepped slightly closer to him, her hand tightening just enough in his, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "Some things are clear the moment you stop overthinking them," she said, her eyes meeting the other woman's without hesitation, and the room seemed to quiet around that simple sentence, the tension shifting, not disappearing, but changing direction. Ethan looked at her then, truly looked, as if seeing something he had not expected, something that was not part of any plan, and for the first time that night, he did not feel like he was leading the moment. He was inside it, reacting to it, and as the conversation moved on, as the noise of the room returned, as the roles settled back into place, one thing had already changed in a way neither of them could ignore. She was no longer just someone standing beside him. She was someone who could step forward when it mattered, and somehow, that made everything more real than either of them had intended. "Who was she to you?" Lily asked quietly once the car door closed and the noise of the night faded behind them. And this time Ethan did not answer immediately. His gaze fixed ahead, his jaw slightly tighter than before, the silence stretching longer than it had any right to. And Lily did not push. She simply waited, her hands resting calmly in her lap. But the question remained between them, steady, unavoidable. Someone who knew how to play the part. He said finally, his voice controlled, almost distant, and something in the way he said it made the air feel colder, not because of what he revealed, but because of what he did not. Lily turned her head slightly, studying him in the dim reflection of the window. "And you trusted her?" she asked, her tone soft, careful, and Ethan let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a short laugh, but without any warmth. "I trusted what I thought was real," he replied, and that answer lingered, heavier than the others. When they returned to the penthouse, the space felt different again, not quiet in the same way as before, but filled with something unresolved, something pressing just beneath the surface. Lily moved toward the kitchen without a word, her steps slow, grounded, reaching for the small ceramic cup as if it was the only thing in the room that still made sense. The familiar motion of making tea returning like a rhythm she could hold on to. But before the kettle could fully heat, Ethan's voice cut through the silence, sharper this time. "You handled tonight well," he said. But there was something off in the way the words landed, less like appreciation, more like distance. Lily paused, her hand resting lightly on the counter. "You already said that," she replied, not turning around, and the quiet honesty in her tone seemed to unsettle him more than if she had challenged him. "Then I will say something else," he added, stepping closer now, the space between them narrowing. "Do not confuse this with anything more than what it is." The words were calm, measured, but they carried a line he was drawing, clear and deliberate. And Lily closed her eyes for just a second, as if absorbing the impact before responding. When she turned, her expression was steady, but her eyes held something deeper now, something quieter but stronger. "I am not the one confusing it," she said, her voice low, and the tension between them tightened, not loud, not explosive, but undeniable. Ethan's gaze sharpened slightly. "You stepped in tonight like it mattered," he said, "like you believed in it." And Lily met his eyes without hesitation. "I stepped in because you needed someone who would not hesitate," she replied. "Not because I believe in anything you are trying to keep distant." The words landed with a quiet force, not aggressive, but clear enough to leave no space for misinterpretation, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them, no longer physical but emotional, stretched thin by something neither of them fully controlled. "You think you understand what this is," Ethan said after a pause, his voice lower now, more guarded. "But you do not." And Lily shook her head slightly, not dismissing him, just disagreeing. "No," she said softly. "I understand exactly what it is, and that is why I am not pretending when we are alone." She picked up the cup then, the steam rising faintly between them, a small, quiet presence in the middle of something much larger. "You keep calling it control," she continued, her voice steady, "but it looks more like fear." And that was the moment something shifted. Not outwardly, not in a way that would draw attention, but inside him, something tightened, something resisted, and something else, quieter, almost hidden, recognized the truth in her words, and he stepped back slightly, creating space again, as if distance could restore the balance he was used to. "Do not analyze me," he said, not harsh, but firm, and Lily did not move closer. She did not soften the moment. She simply nodded once, accepting the boundary without stepping away from her own. "Then do not push me away for something I did not create," she replied, and the room fell into silence again. But this time, it was not the kind that brought comfort. It was the kind that held tension, truth, and something fragile beginning to form between two people who were no longer just playing a role, but were now standing at the edge of something real, whether they wanted to admit it or not. "Some things are not meant to stay," Lily said quietly the next morning, and Ethan did not realize at first that she was speaking to him, the words drifting through the stillness of the penthouse like something unfinished, something already leaving. He stood near the window, the city below moving in its usual rhythm, but inside, everything felt slightly out of place, like something had shifted overnight without warning. "What does that mean?" he asked without turning around, his voice controlled but carrying an edge he did not intend to reveal. And Lily did not answer right away. She moved slowly through the space, her steps light, deliberate, as if she was memorizing the distance between things, the kitchen counter, the glass walls, the quiet corners that had begun to feel less empty. And when she reached the counter, her fingers brushed against the small ceramic cup, resting exactly where it had always been, the faint crack along its rim catching the soft morning light. She held it for a moment, not lifting it, just feeling its presence, grounding herself in something simple, something real. "It means I am leaving," she said finally, her voice steady, not dramatic, not fragile, just certain. And that was what made it land harder than anything else she could have said. Ethan turned then, his expression tightening, not in anger, but in something sharper, something closer to disbelief. "That is not part of the agreement," he said, stepping closer, his words precise, controlled, but beneath them was something unsettled, something he was no longer fully containing. Lily looked at him, her eyes calm but distant in a way they had not been before. "I told you from the beginning," she replied softly. "I would stay, but I would not be something you could keep." The words were not meant to hurt, but they did, in a quiet, undeniable way. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, his control slipping just enough to be felt. "You are walking away because of one conversation?" he asked, and there was a trace of something else in his voice now, something that did not belong to logic or contracts. And Lily shook her head gently. "I am leaving because I can see where this goes if I stay," she said, her fingers still resting lightly on the cup. "And it is not something you are ready for." The honesty in her tone was soft, but it carried a truth he could not easily dismiss. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them, filled with everything that had not been said, everything that had almost become something more. "You do not get to decide that for me," Ethan said after a pause, his voice lower now, more personal than before, and Lily met his gaze without stepping back. "No," she agreed quietly, "but I do get to decide it for myself." And that was the line, clear, undeniable, the one neither of them could cross for the other. She picked up the cup then, holding it gently for a second before placing it back down on the counter, this time with more intention, like leaving something behind on purpose. "This was never yours to keep either," she added softly, and Ethan's eyes followed the movement, the small object suddenly carrying more weight than it should, more than he wanted it to. "Where will you go?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. And Lily gave the faintest hint of a smile, not sad, not relieved, just quiet. "Somewhere that does not need me to pretend," she answered, and then she turned, walking toward the door with the same calm steps she had always carried. No rush, no hesitation, just a steady movement forward. And when the door closed behind her, the sound was soft, almost gentle, but it echoed through the space in a way that left something behind, something unfinished, something he could not ignore. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the silence heavier now, the absence more present than anything else, and slowly, almost without thinking, he walked toward the counter, his hand reaching for the cup, his fingers tracing the faint crack along its edge, imperfect, fragile, and still holding the warmth of everything that had passed between them. And for the first time, he understood that what she left behind was not just an object. It was the part of something real he had not known how to hold on to, until it was already gone. "You said you would not disappear without notice," Ethan said quietly when he finally found her, his voice softer than it had ever been. And Lily turned slowly, standing just outside a small cafe on a quiet street. Nothing like his world, nothing like the places he controlled. And yet, for the first time, he stepped into it without hesitation, without distance, just standing there, looking at her like he was no longer trying to solve anything.